She laughed at his rusted truck at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By 6 o'clock that evening, that same truck was the only thing standing between her and death. But this isn't a story about a man rescuing a woman from floodwaters. This is a story about what happens when the most powerful woman in the room discovers she's been measuring the wrong things her entire life, and what it costs her to finally admit it. If you've ever been judged by what you drive, where you live, or what you wear, this story is for you. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this goes. The highway into Willow Creek wasn't on any GPS shortlist for scenic routes. It was the kind of road that made luxury tires feel like a personal insult. 2 cracked lanes of old asphalt cutting through tobacco fields and pine stands, past hand-painted mailboxes and rust-streaked grain silos that hadn't held grain in 20 years. The kind of road that said, plainly and without apology, "You are not in the city anymore." Victoria Sterling had driven roads like this before, but only by accident, never by choice. She sat in the back seat of her black Escalade, laptop open, half-eaten protein bar on the center console beside her, phone pressed to one ear, and a set of architectural renderings spread across her knees. Outside, the Tennessee sky was doing something ominous. A green-gray shade that meteorologists on the radio were calling severe watch conditions, and that Victoria was calling an inconvenience. "Move the Hargrove call to Thursday," she said into the phone. "And tell Marcus that if the soil survey isn't on my desk before I land in Nashville, he should start updating his resume." "I'm not joking, Dana. He does this every project." Her assistant's voice on the other end was careful, practiced. "Understood. Also, the county commissioner's office called again about the community meeting. They want to confirm you'll be presenting personally." "I'll be there." Victoria shifted the renderings and looked out the window. "This deal closes in 6 weeks. I'm not sending a proxy to some town hall in a county that doesn't even have a Starbucks." She ended the call without a goodbye. That wasn't rudeness in her mind, it was efficiency. Goodbyes were for people with time to waste, and Victoria Sterling had not built a $2.3 billion real estate development company by wasting time. She was 30 years old. She had been on the cover of Forbes twice. She owned 3 properties and had slept a full 8 hours exactly 11 times in the past year because she kept a log. And she was, by any metric she trusted, winning. The Escalade pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store called Denton's Family Market on the edge of Willow Creek's main drag. The lot was cracked concrete with faded yellow lines, bordered by a hardware store on one side and what appeared to be a taxidermist on the other. A hand-lettered sign in the taxidermist's window read, "Deer Season Special, $120 full mount. Satisfaction guaranteed." Victoria's driver, a quiet man named Paul, who had learned to anticipate her silences, pulled into a space near the entrance. 30 minutes, she said, sliding out without looking up from her phone. "I need water, something with actual protein, and ideally coffee that isn't terrible." "Yes, ma'am." She was halfway to the entrance when she noticed it. The truck. It was parked 3 spaces down, a Ford F-150 that had to be at least 20 years old, maybe older. The bed had surface rust along every seam. The passenger side mirror was held in place with what appeared to be duct tape and optimism. The rear bumper had a crack running diagonally through it, repaired at some point with a bolt and a piece of angle iron that someone had welded on themselves. Badly. One of the tires was newer than the others. The contrast was almost funny. There was a faded sticker on the back windshield, a little girl's name in pink block letters. Lily. Below it, a soccer ball graphic that had been sun-bleached to almost nothing. Victoria stopped walking. She looked at the truck for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was a short sound, involuntary, the kind of laugh that escapes before you can decide if it's appropriate. She pulled out her phone, took a picture of it, the rust, the duct tape, the whole sad composition, and sent it to her friend Margot with a single caption. "Willow Creek, Tennessee. God help us." Margot replied in seconds. "Is that even street legal?" Victoria was still smiling when she pushed through the glass door into Denton's. She didn't see the man who owned the truck. He was in the next aisle over, standing in front of a wall of canned goods with a 7-year-old girl on the front of the cart, legs dangling, one shoe untied, eating a granola bar that hadn't been paid for yet. The man was reading the back of a soup can with the focused expression of someone who actually cared about sodium content. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 32 years old, 5'11", with the kind of hands that told a story before he opened his mouth, knuckles that had met concrete and rebar and hot wire casings, a scar along his right index finger from a conduit accident 6 years back. He wore a gray Henley that had been washed so many times the fabric was thin at the elbows, and work boots that had been resoled once already. He wasn't what anyone would call conventionally striking. His jaw had a little too much weight to it, and there were shadows under his eyes that didn't go away even on the mornings he managed 7 hours. He looked, if you passed him quickly, like background scenery, just a man in a grocery store. But the girl on the front of the cart was laughing at something he'd said, really laughing, the full body kind, head tipping back. And he was watching her with an expression that most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it. Complete, undivided, unhurried love. "Dad," Lily said, recovering, wiping her eye. "You said noodle in a funny voice." "I say noodle normally. The noodle word is just funny on its own. You can't blame me for that. Say it again." "Noodle." She lost it again. He smiled, put the soup can back, and grabbed a different one. "Okay, that's your last free laugh. The rest costs 50 cents each." "I don't have 50 cents. "Then you better save them up." He moved the cart forward, turned the corner into the next aisle, and for one brief moment he was visible to anyone standing near the front of the store. Victoria was standing near the front of the store. She didn't register him. She was already on another call, already somewhere else in her head, already calculating the distance between Willow Creek and the rest of her life. They passed within 20 feet of each other. Nothing happened. That was the thing about the moments that changed everything. They almost always looked like nothing, right up until they didn't. The storm came fast. Victoria had been in the parking lot for less than 10 minutes when the sky did something she hadn't seen outside of news footage. The green-gray shade deepened, the wind went from absent to aggressive in about 30 seconds, and the temperature dropped enough that she felt it through her blazer. Her phone buzzed. "Dana, NWS just upgraded to flash flood warning, not watch. County roads may flood quickly. Recommend staying put." Victoria looked at the horizon, looked at her phone, looked at the time. She had a conference call at 7. She had dinner reservations in Nashville that had taken 3 weeks to secure. She had 47 unread emails and a life that did not stop moving simply because Tennessee couldn't manage its weather. She got in the Escalade. "The forecast looks rough," Paul said from the driver's seat. His voice had a careful quality. "We'll be at the hotel before it gets bad. Take Route 12. Route 12 goes through the lowlands near Carver Creek. If there's flooding..." "Paul." He went quiet. She opened her laptop. They made it 4 miles before the water appeared. It came from everywhere at once, the way flash floods do. Not a single source, but the whole landscape releasing at once. Water sheeting off fields that were already saturated, drains backing up, the road turning from road into river in a matter of minutes. Paul slowed the Escalade to a crawl, and Victoria finally looked up from her screen. The crossing ahead was submerged. The bridge over Carver Creek, a low-water bridge, the kind of crossing that looked perfectly reasonable when it was dry and became genuinely dangerous when it wasn't, had maybe 8 inches of water moving across it, maybe more. It was hard to tell in the rain. "We should turn back," Paul said. He wasn't asking. He was stating it in the tone of a man who had decided. "How deep is that?" "I can't tell from here, but that current..." "The Escalade has an elevated chassis. We can make it." "Ms. Sterling..." "Drive, Paul." The pause before he complied was the longest pause she'd ever heard from him. He pulled forward slowly. The water hit the tires, then the wheel wells, and for about 20 seconds it seemed like she might be right. The big SUV pushed through the rising water with the confidence of something that outweighed everything it touched. Then the engine died. It didn't sputter. It didn't cough. It just stopped. Mid-crossing, in the middle of 4 inches of fast-moving brown water that was becoming 5 inches while they sat there. The current rocked the vehicle gently, like a suggestion. "Paul." Her voice was very controlled. "Start it." He tried. The starter clicked, turned over, and died. Tried again. Same result. Hydrolock. Water in the intake, engine seized. Ms. Sterling, we need to get out of the vehicle, now, before it gets deeper. She looked out the window. The water was brown and opaque and moving faster than it should have been. Somewhere upstream, a culvert had failed or a field drain had overflowed, and all of that displaced water was looking for somewhere to go and had found, specifically, this crossing. Get out on the upstream side, Paul said, already opening his door, the water immediately rushing in around his feet. Climb to the roof if you can't stand. Don't try to wade. Hold the vehicle. She did what he said. She was good in crises, generally, but this was a different kind of crisis than conference rooms and contract negotiations. This was the kind that involved cold water and a current that pulled at her legs with more authority than anything she'd encountered in a boardroom. They made it to the roof of the Escalade, both of them. The rain was relentless and the water was still rising, and the vehicle was beginning to shudder slightly against the current. Not dramatically, not tipping over, just shuddering, like something reminding her it was not permanent. Paul had his phone out. Dead. She had hers. One bar, then none, then one again. She called 911, got a busy signal. Every line in the county tied up simultaneously with the same storm. She called Dana. I need you to contact emergency services in Harker County, Tennessee, Route 12 near Carver Creek Bridge. We are stranded on top of a vehicle in floodwater. I need... The call dropped. She tried again. Dropped again. The current pushed at the Escalade and the vehicle moved. Not much, maybe 2 inches, but it moved, and that was the moment Victoria Sterling understood, with complete and sudden clarity, that she was in genuine trouble. Not inconvenience trouble. Not PR trouble. Not the kind of trouble that could be solved by calling the right person and applying pressure. The kind of trouble that didn't care who she was. She sat on the roof of her $100,000 SUV in the rain, in a county she'd arrived in 4 hours ago, and she had no leverage and no exit and no next move. It was the most alone she'd felt in years. She heard it before she saw it. The sound of an engine, not a smooth engine, not the kind that announced itself with quiet confidence, but a laboring, grinding, working engine, the kind built before automotive engineers started optimizing for silence. A pair of headlights swung around the bend in the road 200 yards back, cutting through the rain and the failing light. The rust-covered truck she'd photographed 3 hours ago pulled up to the edge of the flooded crossing and stopped. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out into the rain without a jacket, walked to the edge of the water, and assessed the crossing with the unhurried attention of someone who had seen floods before and understood them. He moved along the bank for 30 feet in each direction, testing the ground with his boot, reading the current the way other people read menus. Then he got back in the truck. Victoria's stomach dropped. He's leaving. He's going to turn around and leave. The truck didn't turn around. It pulled forward, into the water. She watched it happen in something close to disbelief. The old Ford pushing into the flooded crossing at a slow, deliberate angle, not straight across but angled upstream, cutting into the current rather than fighting it head-on. The water climbed the tires, the wheel wells, reached the running boards, and the truck kept moving. Slowly, methodically. The engine note didn't waver. It took 4 minutes to reach her. The man stopped the truck with its passenger side facing her, the cab window already rolled down. He looked at her across the water with an expression that she couldn't read in the rain and the bad light. "You hurt?" he called. "No." She was shaking slightly. Cold, she told herself. Just cold. "Your friend?" Paul beside her shook his head. "I'm fine. Okay." The man looked at the water level, looked at the distance between the truck and the roof of the Escalade. "I'm going to pull alongside. Passenger door is unlocked. You're going to need to step down into the water. It's going to hit you about mid-thigh. And get to the door fast. Don't fight the current, just lean into the truck when you reach it. You understand?" "Yes," she said. "Go one at a time. You first." He pointed at her. "Your guy second." He looked steadier. The slight implication that she was the less steady of the two should have bothered her. It didn't. She was too focused on the water. She went in. The cold was immediate and aggressive. Nothing like a swimming pool. Nothing like anything she'd experienced voluntarily. The current hit her hips and pulled, genuinely pulled. And for a second her feet found nothing solid and she grabbed the side mirror of the Escalade and recalibrated. "Don't stop," the man said. Calm, not urgent. "Keep moving. Current's not bad here. I parked in the slower water. She moved. 3 steps, 4, the water swirling around her waist now, and she hit the side of the truck and grabbed the door handle and pulled it open and got in. The cab was warm. It smelled like motor oil and something faintly sweet. A half-empty juice box on the back seat, a child's drawing tucked under a bungee cord on the dash, a little girl's backpack on the rear bench. The man was already helping Paul, talking him through the same crossing, same calm instructions. Paul made it in 30 seconds. The back door opened and closed. The truck reversed out of the crossing, engine working, tires finding grip on the submerged asphalt. The whole rescue had taken maybe 7 minutes. Victoria sat in the passenger seat dripping water onto cracked vinyl and watched the flooded crossing disappear behind them as the truck climbed back onto dry road. She turned to look at the driver. He was wet from the mid-chest down, shirt plastered to him, watching the road with the focused expression of someone still in the middle of a task. Not looking at her, not waiting for her reaction. "Thank you," she said. The words came out smaller than she intended. He nodded once. "There's a blanket in the back, behind the seat. Grab it. Grab, eat." She found it. An old wool blanket, the kind with a pattern that had been washed into abstraction. She wrapped it around her shoulders. For a moment she almost said something about the compensation she would arrange, the sum she would have her assistant transfer, the car that would obviously need to be recovered, and what that cost was something her company would cover entirely. All the things she was accustomed to using to immediately establish terms after an event that made her feel out of control. She didn't say any of it. She just sat there, wet and shaking slightly, and quiet, and watched the rain hit the windshield and the old wipers clear it away, imperfectly, leaving a streak on the driver's side that she suspected had been there for years. "Road's going to be clear about a half-mile up," the man said. "There's a motel on Morrison Street called the Birchwood. Nothing fancy, but it doesn't flood. I'd stay off 12 and 9 tonight." "Okay," she said. "You from Nashville?" "I'm in from New York, working on a development project in the county." He didn't respond to that, just drove. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was just the silence of 2 people who were strangers, in a truck, after something that hadn't been part of anyone's plan. After a while she said, "How did you know to angle upstream?" He glanced at her briefly. "Reduces the cross-sectional pressure on the vehicle. You come in perpendicular, the current gets the full side profile. You come in angled, it catches less surface. Basic fluid dynamics." He said it without any performance, just stated it. She looked at him. "You've done this before. Twice. My neighbor's car, years ago. And a tractor. Different kind of problem, but same principle." He signaled, even though there was no other car within a mile, and turned onto Morrison Street. "There's the Birchwood." It was exactly what he'd described. Nothing fancy, a single-story motel with exterior doors and a hand-painted sign and a vacancy light that buzzed in the rain. He pulled into the lot and stopped. "Get dry, get warm," he said. "The temperature's dropping tonight." He looked like he was going to say something else. Instead, he turned and looked at Paul in the back seat. "You good?" "Yes, sir. Thank you." The man nodded. Victoria opened the door, got halfway out, stopped. "I want to compensate you," she said. "Properly. If you give me your information—" "I'm all right," he said. "That's not the point. What you just did was—" "There's an elderly woman on Hale Road whose house lost power 20 minutes ago," he said, not cutting her off exactly, but moving through her sentence like it wasn't there. "She's got an oxygen concentrator. I need to get there before her backup battery runs out." He checked his watch, a plain digital watch, the kind that sold for $15. "So I need to go." Victoria stood in the rain holding the door of his truck and looked at him. He wasn't performing anything. There was no calculation behind his eyes, no assessment of what this moment was worth, no angling for the follow-up conversation. He just needed to go because there was a woman on Hale Road who needed oxygen, and the clock was running. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Cole." She nodded slowly. "Victoria Sterling." Something briefly crossed his face. Not recognition, not the usual recalibration that happened when people put her name together with her company. Something closer to acknowledgement. Like she'd told him her name was Victoria and he'd filed it as a fact. Nothing more. "Stay inside tonight," he said. "Storm's not done." He waited until she was clear of the door, Then he put the truck in reverse and pulled out of the lot. She stood in the rain for a few seconds watching the taillights disappear. Then she went inside. The Birchwood Motel had 19 rooms and one vending machine and a front desk manager named Gerald, who was 60-something, soft-spoken, and completely unsurprised to see a soaking wet woman walk in asking for 2 rooms. "Flood on Route 12?" he said. "Yes. 3rd one this month." He typed something slowly into a computer that sounded like it was suffering. "You get rescued, or did you make it out yourself?" "Someone pulled us out." Gerald nodded. "Old truck? Gray Ford?" She looked up. "Yes?" "That'd be Ethan Cole." He slid 2 key cards across the counter. "He does that. Knows how to read those crossings. Grew up around here. Used to flood worse than this when he was a kid. Him and his daddy used to pull people out before the county got a proper rescue team." He paused. "Of course, the county rescue team doesn't always move as fast as Ethan does." Victoria took the key cards. "Does he do this often?" Gerald considered the question. "Often enough that I keep his number on the wall." He nodded toward the board behind him, where a dozen handwritten numbers were pinned. 3rd one from the top. Ethan Cole. Emergency. Any hour. She looked at it for a moment. "He have family?" "Little girl, Lily. She's 7, sharp as a tack." Gerald smiled, the way people smiled about children who had done something specific and memorable. "She came in here last winter with a plate of Christmas cookies and a handwritten card. 7 years old, capital letters, perfect spelling. Card said, 'Thank you for letting Dad's customers stay warm.'" He shook his head. "Like this place was her dad's business." Victoria said nothing. "Room 11 and 12 are quiet. Ice machines at the end of the hall. There's a diner 2 blocks down called Millie's if you need food. They stay open during storms." She thanked him and walked to her room and peeled off her wet clothes and stood under a shower that took 3 minutes to get warm and then was too hot, but she didn't adjust it, just stood in it until she stopped shaking. She thought about the truck, the angle it had taken into the current, the calm voice telling her not to stop, keep moving, the juice box on the back seat, and the child's drawing clipped under the bungee cord on the dash. She thought about the woman on Hale Road and the oxygen concentrator. She thought about the digital watch. $15. She turned the shower off and stood in the steam for a while. Then she sat on the edge of the bed in a Birchwood Motel towel and opened her laptop on instinct, and the screen lit up with 49 unread emails, and the Hargrove call rescheduled, and Marcus's soil survey that had finally arrived, and the rendering for Phase 2 of the Willow Creek project, and all the machinery of her life waiting patiently for her to re-engage. She looked at it for a long moment, closed the laptop. Outside, the storm was still going. She could hear it working on the roof, rain coming in sheets, the parking lot lights making shifting shadows through the curtain gap. Somewhere on Hale Road, she knew, a rusted truck was parked outside a dark house, and a man with a $15 watch was inside making sure an old woman could breathe. Victoria Sterling sat in the dark and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't have a word for it. Not quite shame, not quite admiration. Something in between. Something that didn't show up on any of her metrics. She lay back on the bed without turning the light on and listened to the rain until it was the only thing she was thinking about, which, for the first time in years, was genuinely nothing. The roads were still closed at 7 in the morning. Victoria found this out by opening the Birchwood's thin curtains and looking at Morrison Street, which had a foot of standing water at the far end and a county truck with flashing orange lights parked sideways across the intersection. A hand-lettered sign zip-tied to a sawhorse read, "Road closed. Do not enter." Below it, in smaller letters, someone had added, "We mean it this time." She had slept 4 hours, maybe 4.5. The rain had stopped somewhere around 3 in the morning, and the silence had woken her the way noise usually woke other people. Abruptly, disorienting, the absence of something she'd gotten used to. She'd lain there in the dark, staring at the ceiling tiles, and thinking about things she hadn't planned to think about, which was the worst kind of thinking. She showered again, dressed, and walked 2 blocks to Millie's Diner. It was the kind of place that had been open since before she was born and would probably outlast her. Counter seating along one wall, booths along the other, a specials board in handwriting so practiced it almost looked printed. The smell hit her at the door. Coffee, bacon grease, something with cinnamon. Every table was full. The storm had apparently driven half of Willow Creek indoors simultaneously, and Millie's had absorbed them all with the indifferent competence of a place that had handled worse. The hostess, a teenager with a ponytail and the expression of someone who had been awake since 4, pointed her toward a single open stool at the counter. Victoria sat down, and a coffee mug appeared in front of her within 30 seconds, filled before she asked. She wrapped both hands around it and looked at the menu, which was laminated and had a crack running through the breakfast section. The man 2 stools over was talking to the woman beside him about the Carver Creek crossing. "Third vehicle this week," he was saying. "County keeps saying they're going to put up a barrier. They've been saying that for 6 years. "Ethan pull anyone out last night?" the woman asked. "Lady from out of town, her driver too, black Escalade, things probably halfway to Kentucky by now." Victoria kept her eyes on the menu. "He get Mrs. Paulson sorted out after?" "Went straight there, far as I know. Jesse said he saw the truck on Hale Road around 9. "That woman's kids live 4 hours away. She'd been sitting in the dark for 3 hours by the time the power came back." The man shook his head. "Good thing he keeps that generator in the truck bed." Victoria set down the menu. She ordered eggs and toast without tasting either of them, paid, and walked back to the motel thinking about a generator in a truck bed. The deliberateness of it. The fact that it wasn't preparation for one emergency, but for all emergencies. The kind of readiness that came from years of living in a place and deciding, at some quiet, unmeasured point, that you were responsible for it. She had never lived that way. She had always lived in the direction of away. Paul met her in the parking lot. His suit was badly wrinkled, and he looked like a man who had made the best of a situation he hadn't signed up for. "County says Route 9 should open by noon," he said. "Route 12 won't be clear until tomorrow. I've arranged a tow for the Escalade. Recovery crew can get to it once the water drops." "Fine." She looked at the flooded end of the street. "I'm staying." Paul paused. "The hotel in Nashville. Cancel it. Book me here through the weekend. Both rooms." She looked at him. "Unless you want to drive back to Nashville." He considered. "I'll stay." "Okay." She turned back toward the motel. "I have work to do." She did have work to do. That wasn't a lie or an excuse. The Willow Creek Development Project, a $53 million mixed-use redevelopment of the county's former industrial corridor, was 6 weeks from groundbreaking and had the particular energy of something that looked clean on paper and was about to get complicated in practice. It always happened this way. The further you got from the spreadsheet and the closer you got to the actual ground, the more the complications emerged. She spent the morning on her laptop, going through the infrastructure assessment her lead consultant team had delivered 3 weeks earlier. It was thorough by most standards. Electrical grid capacity analysis, water and sewer load projections, traffic impact modeling. She'd read it once when it came in and approved it with 2 minor comments. Now she read it again, slowly, section by section, with the particular attention she brought to things that had recently made her feel stupid. By noon, she had 3 pages of handwritten notes, and a growing feeling of unease that she couldn't entirely pin down. The electrical section bothered her. Not obviously. There was nothing wrong with it on the surface. The numbers were internally consistent, and the methodology was standard. But there was something about the load projections for the northern residential section that felt off in a way she couldn't articulate. Like a piece of furniture that was slightly out of square. You couldn't identify the problem immediately, but you kept glancing at it. She circled it in red and moved on. Outside, Willow Creek went about the business of recovering from a flood. Chainsaws somewhere in the distance, the gurgle of drains clearing, the occasional truck moving slowly through the residual standing water. Through the window, she could watch Morrison Street return to itself, which it did with the unhurried efficiency of a place that had done this before. Around 2 in the afternoon, she saw Ethan Cole's truck pull into the lot across the street from Millie's. She watched him get out. He was wearing cleaner clothes today. Dark jeans, a flannel over a white t-shirt, work boots again. He had a 7-year-old girl on his shoulders who was holding a water bottle in each hand like she was carrying supplies into hostile territory. The girl was saying something animated that involved gesturing with both water bottles, which made the whole enterprise precarious, and Ethan was holding her ankles with both hands and tilting his head back to listen to her. They went into the hardware store next to Millie's. Victoria was at the window for a moment longer than she needed to be. Then she grabbed her jacket. She wasn't sure what she was doing exactly. She told herself she needed to speak to him, which was true, about compensation, about the recovery of her vehicle, about the practical matters that needed to be addressed. That was the frame she used. It was mostly accurate. She pushed into the hardware store and found him in the electrical aisle. Of course he was in the electrical aisle. He was reading the label on a circuit breaker, and Lily was sitting on the bottom shelf of the display rack eating crackers from a small bag, swinging her legs. She had her father's eyes. That particular quality of attention, watchful and without hurry. "Hi," Lily said, noticing Victoria first. Ethan looked up. Something crossed his face. A mild recalibration. Nothing dramatic. He didn't seem surprised. Small towns had a way of making coincidence feel inevitable. "Miss Sterling," he said, "I'm sorry to interrupt." She hesitated in the aisle in a way she was not accustomed to hesitating. "I wanted to thank you again, properly. Last night was—" She stopped. "I owe you." "You really don't," he said, same tone as the night before. Flat, not unkind. "Ethan." She used his name deliberately. "You drove into a flooded crossing to pull a stranger off a car roof. That's not something I can just—" "Are you the lady from the truck?" Lily asked. Victoria looked at her. "Yes, I am." Lily considered this with the forensic seriousness that 7-year-olds brought to new information. "Dad said you were stuck on top of your car." "I was." "Was it scary?" An honest question. Victoria had the fleeting impulse to give the adult answer. It was a situation I managed, and instead said, "Yes, it was pretty scary." Lily nodded. "Dad's good at floods," she said, without any particular pride. Just as a fact, the same way she might have said Dad's good at pancakes. "I noticed," Victoria said. Ethan had gone back to reading the circuit breaker. She watched him for a moment. The focus, the efficiency, the complete absence of performance. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "The electrical assessment for the Route 7 development corridor. Have you heard anything about it from anyone in town?" He looked up again. His expression shifted in a way that was hard to read, not closed off. More like he'd changed gears. "Why?" "I've been reviewing it this morning. Something in the northern load projections is bothering me, and I can't place it." She paused. "You're an electrician, right? That's what Gerald at the Birchwood told me." "Among other things." He set the circuit breaker down and looked at her steadily. "What specifically is bothering you?" "The demand calculations for the residential section. The methodology looks standard, but the numbers feel low set," he said. She stopped. "Yes, low." He held her gaze for a second, and something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. The specific recognition of two people who had both noticed the same thing and were now aware that the other had noticed it. "They used a 15-year-old load table," he said. "Standard residential demand factors from 2009. They didn't account for the EV charging load, the heat pump conversions, or the new HVAC standards in the current county code." Victoria went still. "How do you know that?" "Because I pulled a permit last spring for a house on the northern end of that corridor and the substation capacity numbers didn't add up. So I looked at what the county was working from." He picked up the circuit breaker again, turned it over once, put it in the small basket hanging from his forearm. "Your consultants probably used the same source material the county gave them. It's not wrong. It's just old." She stared at him. "So if we build to that spec, you'll be fine for 2 years, maybe 3, he said. "Then the grid starts struggling. Rolling brownouts in high-demand periods. By year 5, you've got real problems." He shifted the basket to his other arm. "The substation on Fletcher Road is already running at about 78% capacity on summer peak days. Add 400 residential units and a commercial district, and you're over 100% in July." "My consultants cost $400 an hour," Victoria said. She wasn't sure why she said it. "I know," he said. He didn't say it to wound. He just knew. Lily finished her crackers, folded the bag precisely, and put it in the front pocket of her little jacket. "Dad, can I get the peanut butter crackers too?" "You just had crackers." "Those were the regular ones." "The peanut butter crackers are the same crackers with peanut butter." "That's what makes them different, Dad." He looked at her. She looked back with an expression of absolute reasonableness. He reached into his pocket and held out 2 quarters without looking away from Victoria. Lily took them and slid off the shelf and disappeared around the end of the aisle. "I'd like to sit down with you," Victoria said. "Properly, if you're willing." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not interested in a consulting contract," he said, "if that's where you're heading." "I'm not heading anywhere specific," she said, which was partially true. "I just think you know things about this town's infrastructure that my team missed, and I'd like to understand what I'm working with." He studied her. It was a longer look than most people gave her. People usually looked at Victoria Sterling and made up their minds quickly, one direction or the other. Ethan Cole looked at her the way he'd looked at that flooded crossing, like he was reading something before he decided how to proceed. "I pick Lily up from school at 3:30, he said finally. "After that, we've got dinner. But there's a public works meeting at the rec center tonight at 7 about the storm damage. Half the people who'll be there have opinions about the Route 7 project. If you want to hear what the town actually thinks, that's where to be." "I'll be there," she said. He nodded once and moved down the aisle. She stood there for a moment, holding nothing, having come in to say thank you, and having instead learned something that was going to cost her a significant amount of money to fix, and an uncomfortable conversation with a consultant firm she paid a lot of money to not miss things. Lily reappeared at the end of the aisle holding peanut butter crackers. She looked at Victoria. "Are you staying in Willow Creek?" "For a few days, yes." "The Birchwood?" "Yes." Lily seemed to weigh this. "Gerald has a cat," she said. "His name is Biscuit. He lives under the front desk. You can pet him if you ask nicely." She paused. "Some people don't ask, and then Biscuit scratches them." "I'll remember that," Victoria said. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went to find her father. Victoria walked back out into the pale afternoon sunlight and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She had been in Willow Creek for less than 24 hours. She had nearly drowned in a county road crossing. She was sleeping in a 19-room motel with a vending machine and a cat named Biscuit. Her $100,000 vehicle was currently sitting in floodwater waiting for a recovery crew. Her best consultants had just been quietly, completely, and without any drama outworked by a man reading circuit breaker labels in a hardware store. She pulled out her phone and called her infrastructure consultant, a man named Dale Whitford, who had been billing her company at $4.20 an hour for 7 years. He answered on the second ring. "Victoria, I was just about to—" "The residential load projections for the Route 7 northern section," she said. "What demand factor table did you use?" A brief pause. "Standard residential? The county provided baseline data, updated for current. What year is the table?" Another pause. Longer. "Dale," she said, "I'd have to check with the team." "Check," she said. "Call me back in 30 minutes. She hung up and looked down the street toward the Birchwood, where Paul was probably sitting in his room watching the news and trying to look useful. 40 minutes later, Dale called back and told her, with the careful tone of a man constructing a defense, that the baseline load table had been sourced from county documentation dated 2009, and that while the data was within acceptable industry practice for preliminary assessments, a more current revision would naturally be recommended before final construction spec approval. Victoria listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said, "How much to redo the electrical section with current data?" "For a full revised analysis, probably 8 to 10 weeks, and 3 weeks," she said. "I'll pay the overtime. I want the revised numbers before the town council meeting." She paused. "And Dale, this doesn't leave the team. I'll handle the public-facing questions about the timeline change." She hung up before he could tell her what he thought of the timeline. Then she sat down on the bench outside the Birchwood and looked at the sky, which was washed clean by last night's rain and was now the particular bright blue that only existed in the hours after a storm. She thought about a man who read circuit breakers in hardware stores and pulled generators from truck beds and didn't ask for anything. She thought about the word old applied to a load table the way he'd said it, not as an accusation, not as a performance of expertise, but as a simple fact about the world that she happened not to have known yet. She had built her company on being the smartest person in her rooms. She hired smart people. She asked hard questions. She didn't miss things. That was her identity as much as anything else she carried. She had missed this. Not because she wasn't smart, because she had never needed to stand in this particular place, in this particular town, with this particular knowledge. The distinction mattered to her, and also didn't matter at all. She went back to her room and worked until 6, then put on dry clothes and walked to the Willow Creek Recreation Center on Oak Street, which was a brown brick building with a marquee sign out front that currently read, Public Works Meeting tonight, 7 p.m./Youth Soccer Tryout Saturday, 9 a.m./Congrats Bees on their Spelling Bee win. The meeting room smelled like folding chairs and old coffee. About 60 people were already inside, which seemed like a significant fraction of the town's engaged population. They ranged from retirees to young parents with kids on their laps, farmers in work clothes to a pair of city council members in button-downs. A projector screen at the front showed a county flood map with yesterday's affected roads highlighted in red. She took a seat near the back, which she had learned was tactically better than the front in settings where she was not yet trusted. She had her notebook. She watched. The meeting was run by a county works manager named Bert, who was bald and patient and had the specific energy of a man who had run many such meetings and had learned that the first 40 minutes were for people to say what they needed to say before anyone started solving anything. He let the room go through its frustrations. The Carver Creek crossing barrier that had been promised for years, the drainage problem on the south side of the industrial corridor, the storm alert system that had apparently sent its automated warning text 18 minutes after the worst of the flooding had already started. When the Route 7 development project came up, and it came up fast, maybe 20 minutes in, from a woman in her 50s in the third row who clearly had opinions she had been saving for a public forum, the room shifted. The concern, the woman said, standing without being called on, is that nobody from Sterling Development has actually sat in this room and listened to the people who live here. They've had consultants and surveys and county liaisons, but that's different. That's paper. There was a rumble of agreement. The project's going to bring construction traffic on roads that are already struggling, said a man near the window. My shop's on the corner of Route 7 and Mills. I've already got issues with vibration from the trucks going by. At a construction corridor for 18 months, and I don't know if my foundation survives it. More agreement, Victoria wrote in her notebook. Not defensively. She was writing because she hadn't known about the shop on Route 7 in Mills, and she should have. And it was the kind of thing that her consultants also hadn't noted because they had been looking at the project from the outside in. The meeting went for 90 minutes. She didn't speak. She didn't introduce herself, though she suspected at least a few people in the room knew who she was. A couple of them had glanced at her in the way people glanced at someone they recognized from a photograph. Ethan was there. She hadn't seen him come in. He was sitting 4 rows ahead of her on the opposite side, arms crossed, listening. He didn't speak either for most of the meeting. When Bert finally opened the floor for anything else, Ethan raised his hand once and stood. The Route 12 crossing, he said. We've been asking for a barrier for 3 years. Last night was the 4th rescue from that crossing in 2 years. I'm not always going to be the nearest person. Bert wrote something down. We've submitted the request twice to the State Infrastructure Fund. We're in queue. Can we escalate it? Ethan asked. Not aggressive, just direct. I can put it back in front of the commissioner. Bert said it like a man who was going to actually do it. It'll go to the November cycle at best. November, Ethan repeated. I know. Ethan sat down. He didn't look satisfied. He looked like a man who had heard November when he meant now and was deciding how to live with that gap. Victoria wrote, Route 12 crossing barrier, bypass state queue, direct county funding option. She underlined it. After the meeting, people stood around talking in the way of communities that used public events as social occasions. Victoria was getting her jacket when she heard a voice behind her. You came, Ethan. He was carrying Lily, who had apparently been at the meeting this whole time. She'd been sitting with an older woman 2 rows back and was now fully asleep against her father's shoulder, her small face mashed against his jacket collar, mouth slightly open. You brought her, Victoria said, nodding at Lily. Babysitter had the same flooding issue everyone else did. He shifted Lily's weight slightly. She's fine. She sleeps through anything. Victoria looked at the sleeping child for a moment. There was something about the weight of her against him. The way he held her without thinking about it, adjusted for her automatically, kept his voice low without appearing to try. You heard what Marjorie said about the consultants, he said. It wasn't a question. I did. She's not wrong. I know. Victoria pulled on her jacket. I know she's not. He studied her with that same reading the current quality. Most people in your position get defensive. I have a long drive back to New York, she said. I'd rather spend it knowing what I actually built than defending something I got wrong. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, that was too easy a word for it. Something less resolved than warmth. More like, The electrical issue, he said. You called your consultants. This afternoon. And? They confirmed the table was from 2009. They're redoing the analysis. He nodded slowly, a quiet nod, the kind that wasn't approval exactly, more like acknowledgement that a thing had been done that needed doing. You said you weren't interested in a consulting contract, she said. I'm not. What are you interested in? He looked at her for a long moment. Lily stirred slightly against his shoulder, made a small sound, settled back into sleep. Getting home, he said. It's a school night. He said goodnight without ceremony and walked out of the rec center into the dark parking lot. Victoria stood in the emptying room for a moment, her notebook under her arm and her jacket half-zipped, watching the door he'd gone through. She walked back to the Birchwood alone. Gerald was at the front desk. Biscuit was under it, a gray tabby of considerable age and self-possession, visible only as two reflective eyes in the shadow beneath the counter. How was the meeting? Gerald asked. Informative. She paused. Gerald, how long has Ethan Cole lived here? Gerald thought. Born here. Left for college. Engineering school somewhere up north, one of the good ones. Came back maybe 6, 7 years ago. He straightened some papers. Lily was just a baby when he came back. Her mother wasn't... He paused. That's not my story to tell. No, she agreed. He could have gone anywhere, Gerald said. Smart as he is. People around here know it, even if they don't say it much. Men like Ethan, they don't need the saying. She went to her room and sat at the small desk by the window with the infrastructure report open in front of her. She read the electrical section 3 more times. Then she opened a new document and started writing notes. Real notes, the kind she wrote when she was trying to understand something rather than manage it. What the load table missed. What it would take to fix. What the substation on Fletcher Road could and couldn't handle. What questions she needed to ask that she hadn't known to ask a week ago. She wrote for 2 hours. At 11:30 she stopped and looked at what she had. It was a mess. It was incomplete. It had arrows pointing in 3 directions and margins full of questions she couldn't answer. But it was closer to true than anything her consultants had given her. Outside, Willow Creek was quiet. The last of the storm's water was finding its way to wherever water went, and the streets were empty. And somewhere on the other side of this small town, a man was putting a sleeping 7-year-old to bed in a house she hadn't seen, living a life that didn't look like anything she'd been taught to want. She closed the document and turned off the light. She didn't fall asleep quickly. But when she did, she didn't think about the project. She found out about his past on a Thursday morning, from a woman she hadn't planned to meet. The roads had cleared by Wednesday. Route 9 opened first, then Route 12. The county had put up temporary barriers at the Carver Creek crossing, while the permanent solution worked its way through November's funding cycle, which Victoria had already decided was not going to be November if she had anything to say about it. The Escalade had been recovered, dried out, and declared a total loss by the insurance adjuster who drove down from Nashville on Tuesday afternoon and spent 20 minutes walking around it with the expression of a man confirming something he already knew. She had rented a Jeep from a place in the next county over and moved her work to the Birchwood small breakfast room, which Gerald unlocked for her each morning without being asked. She had stopped explaining herself. Gerald had stopped asking. Biscuit now appeared on the chair beside her at roughly 9 each morning and sat there until he got bored, which was his schedule and not subject to negotiation. The work had shifted. That was the only way she knew how to describe it to herself. 3 days ago, she had been reviewing a project she believed was essentially sound, with some minor adjustments needed in the community engagement strategy. Now she was pulling at a thread that kept producing more thread. The electrical issue was the first thing, but once she started looking at the project from the ground up rather than the model down, other things surfaced. The drainage plan for the commercial corridor, the traffic routing during construction, the loading dock placement for the anchor retail space, which she now knew would put delivery trucks directly through the neighborhood where the man with the vibrating foundation lived 6 days a week. She had 3 calls with Dale Whitford's team in 2 days. She had started keeping a second notebook specifically for questions she needed to ask people who actually lived here. That was why she was at the Willow Creek Public Library on Thursday morning. She wanted the county's historical infrastructure records, the original grid maps, the substation expansion history, anything that gave her the picture Dale's team had worked around. The librarian directed her to a woman named Ruth Castellano, who managed the county archive room in the library's back section and had the organized, proprietorial energy of someone who had been the only person who knew where things were for a very long time. Ruth was 63, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she pulled the infrastructure files without being asked twice. She also, without being asked at all, made a pot of coffee on a small machine on the archive room's side table and poured Victoria a cup before sitting down with her own and asking, with complete directness, "You're the Sterling Development woman." "Yes," Victoria said. "I figured." Ruth looked at her over her glasses. "You're the first person from that company who's been in this building." "I know," Victoria said. "That's part of why I'm here." Ruth seemed to accept this. She watched Victoria open the first folder of grid maps and said, "You know, the last person who sat in that chair asking about the substation capacity was Ethan Cole, about a year and a half ago." Victoria looked up. "He was working on something," Ruth said, with the tone of someone deciding how much to share. "A report. Voluntary. No one commissioned it. He just got concerned about what he was seeing in the permit applications coming through, and he put together an analysis of where the grid was heading." She sipped her coffee. "He submitted it to the county planning board." "What did they do with it?" "Filed it." Ruth said the word with a particular flatness that communicated everything. "Thanked him for his time and filed it. That was 14 months ago." She paused. "I made a copy. It's in the third folder down." Victoria found it. 42 pages, printed on standard paper, with hand-drawn diagrams in the margins where the printed figures weren't sufficient. The cover page said, "Harker County Northern Corridor Infrastructure Capacity Assessment, Independent Review, Cole." No title, no credentials listed. Just a name and a date and 42 pages of the most organized technical analysis she had read in years, including from people she paid significantly to produce organized technical analysis. She read the executive summary twice. Then she read the methodology section. Then she sat back in the archive room chair and looked at the water stain on the ceiling tile above her. He had identified the load table problem 14 months ago. He had identified 3 additional capacity constraints she hadn't seen yet. He had projected the failure timeline with enough specificity that she could have used it in a board presentation with minor reformatting. He had also, and this was the part that stopped her, identified the Carver Creek crossing as a flood risk and recommended a barrier with engineering calculations to support the cost estimate. All of it filed, thanked for his time. "Ruth," she said carefully, "what did Ethan do before he came back to Willow Creek?" Ruth set down her coffee cup. She looked at Victoria for a moment with the assessing gaze of someone deciding if the person in front of her deserved the real answer. "You should probably ask him that yourself," she said. "But since you're sitting here with that report in your hand, I'll tell you what's a matter of public record." She leaned back in her chair. He had a career with a regional infrastructure firm out of Memphis, Harlan Cross Engineering, one of the bigger ones in the Mid-South. He was their lead systems engineer on a highway corridor project in Mississippi. Major state contract, multi-year. He would have been, 25? 26 when he led that project. What happened? Ruth looked at her steadily. He found something wrong in the electrical infrastructure design for the corridor's service facilities. There was a fundamental grounding fault in the design spec that had been signed off by 3 senior engineers above him and approved by the state contractor. He flagged it internally. She paused. Nobody moved on it. Victoria was very still. He escalated it. Still nothing. So he documented it formally and went to the State Infrastructure Oversight Board. Ruth picked up her coffee cup again, turned it in her hands without drinking from it. The company found out before the board responded. They let him go. Called it a restructuring. The word came out with a specific bitterness that said Ruth had an opinion about corporate restructurings. 30 days later, there was an incident at one of the service facilities on that corridor. Electrical fault. 2 maintenance workers were hurt. Badly hurt. One of them had permanent damage to his hands. The archive room was very quiet. The Oversight Board investigation confirmed Ethan's original finding, Ruth said. The grounding fault was exactly what he'd said it was. Harlan Cross paid a settlement. The state fined the contractor. Everyone involved got to move on. She set down the cup. Except Ethan. He had a non-disparagement agreement in his severance. Standard language. His lawyer told him it was unenforceable, but fighting it would have cost more than it was worth. By then his wife had left. He had Lily to raise, and the industry is small enough that Harlan Cross's reach was long enough. She shook her head. He didn't hide from it. He just stopped fighting it, came home. Victoria looked at the 42-page report in her hands. He never told anyone here the whole story, Ruth added. People know pieces. I know more than most because he helped me redo the wiring in this building 2 years ago, and we talked. She smiled faintly. He charged me materials only. Said the electrical code the previous contractor used was from 1987, and it was making him nervous. Victoria looked down at the report again, at the hand-drawn diagrams in the margins, at the date. 14 months ago, when Ethan Cole had sat somewhere and put 42 pages together for a planning board that had thanked him and filed it. She thought about what that cost. Not the hours. She understood hours. She understood the particular kind of labor that came from caring enough about something to document it formally when you had no institutional backing and no professional title and nothing to gain except the chance that someone would listen. She thought about the two men with damaged hands. She thought about the way he had said your consultants used a 2009 table, not as an accusation, not with any edge of bitterness, just as a fact about the world. A man who had been proved right at great personal cost and had not apparently let being proved right become the most important thing about him. She stood up, thanked Ruth, and left the report on the table, then stopped and turned back. Can I make a copy of this? Ruth was already reaching for the machine. The town council meeting was the following evening. Sterling Development's presentation of the Route 7 project had been on the agenda for 3 weeks, and Victoria had intended to fly in from New York the morning of, present, and fly back out the same day. That version of events had been replaced by a version involving a flooded truck crossing and a motel cat and 42 pages of ignored analysis. And now she was sitting in Willow Creek 4 days before the meeting trying to figure out what she was going to say. She found Ethan at the diner the next morning. She didn't engineer it. She just went to Millie's for breakfast because it was the best food available, and he was already there, in a booth near the back, reading something on his phone with a mug of coffee. The diner was half full, the morning rush thinning out. She stopped at his booth. He looked up. "Can I sit down?" she asked. He gestured at the bench across from him. She sat. The waitress, not the teenager, this one was older, named Pat, who had the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had been doing this for decades, appeared and refilled Ethan's coffee and looked at Victoria. "Coffee," Victoria said, "and whatever he's having." Ethan glanced at her, mildly surprised. "Biscuits and gravy." "That's fine." Pat left. Victoria put the copied report on the table between them. He looked at it. His expression didn't change dramatically, a slight tightening around the eyes, recognition, and something carefully neutral coming down over it. "Ruth," he said. "She thought I should see it." He picked up his coffee and didn't say anything for a moment. "It's thorough," Victoria said. "It's better than what my team produced, and they had a full budget in 6 weeks. Your team had a different job," he said. "They were confirming a plan. I was trying to understand a problem. The planning board had this for over a year. I know. They did nothing with it. I know that too." His voice was even, not resigned. Something flatter than resignation. The equanimity of a man who had already spent his feelings on this particular disappointment and come out the other side. "Were you going to mention it?" she asked. "To me, I mean." "Before the council meeting." He turned the coffee cup in his hands, a gesture she was starting to recognize. The way he handled objects when he was choosing his words carefully. "I was thinking about it," he said finally. "What stopped you?" He looked at her directly. "I didn't know if you were the kind of person who wanted to hear it." The honesty of it was a little jarring, not unkind, just unfiltered in the way that people were when they had spent enough time outside corporate culture to forget its particular conventions of tactful indirection. "I've been rethinking the whole project," she said, "since the hardware store, since the public works meeting." She paused. This report is one piece of it, but there's more. The commercial drainage, the construction routing, the loading dock placement. I've been pulling at it all week. He was quiet for a moment. The drainage issue on the commercial corridor is connected to the electrical issue, he said. The water management plan routes run off toward the Elkins Basin, but the basin's already at capacity in heavy rain, which you saw Tuesday night. He picked up his coffee. If the commercial corridor is built to the current plan, you're adding impervious surface without adequate detention. First significant rain event after opening, you've got water in the lower storefronts, Victoria wrote in her notebook. How significant a detention modification? Depends on what you're willing to do with the green space allocation in Phase 2. There's a strip along the eastern edge of the corridor. It's currently earmarked for surface parking. If you convert 40% of that to a bioretention system, you solve the detention problem and you end up with something that looks better than a parking lot. He set down the cup. I drew it out about 8 months ago, when I heard about the project. She stared at him. You drew it out? I was curious. Where is it? He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, and slid it across the table to her. A sketch. Not a professional rendering, just a clean hand-drawn diagram with dimensions noted along the margins in small, precise numbers. The eastern strip of the corridor divided into parking sections and planted bioretention cells with overflow routing marked. It was immediately legible. It was also, she realized within 30 seconds of looking at it, correct. Pat appeared with 2 plates of biscuits and gravy, refilled the coffees, and disappeared again without a word. Victoria put Ethan's phone down and looked at him. Why haven't you brought any of this to the county formally? She asked. Beyond the report you filed. Why haven't you been in those council meetings, standing up and saying these things? Something moved across his face. I did, he said, 3 years ago. Before the project was officially announced, when it was still rumors and land purchases. I went to the county commissioner and asked for a meeting. I put together a preliminary brief. He gave me 20 minutes and told me the project was going to bring jobs and tax revenue and that my concerns were noted. The careful evenness in his voice had a seam in it now, something underneath. After Harlan Cross, I spent a year fighting through official channels for something that was obviously true. I was right. And I lost anyway. Lost the job, lost the marriage. She couldn't take the uncertainty, I don't blame her. Nearly lost the ability to work in my field. He picked up his fork and looked at it rather than her. There's only so many times you go back to the well that's been dry. The diner noise went on around them. Other conversations, the clatter of dishes, Pat calling an order back to the kitchen. Normal sounds of a normal morning. I'm not the county commissioner, Victoria said. He looked at her. I'm not a state infrastructure board. I'm not Harlan Cross. She kept her voice level because she could tell that anything that sounded like a speech would close him off. I'm a developer who built a plan on bad data and is now sitting across from the person who has the better data. That's a different situation. He studied her for a long moment. You're going to present tomorrow night, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. What are you going to say? I don't know yet, she said honestly. I know I can't present the original plan. The electrical section alone is enough to make the whole infrastructure approach unreliable. But I'm also not going to stand up in front of this town and announce a full redesign when I don't have the redesign yet. She paused. I'm going to have to say that the timeline is changing. He was quiet, looking at his plate. People here are going to see that as the company backing out, he said, or stalling. Either way, they'll read it as bad faith. I know. The trust isn't there to begin with. This kind of project, coming into a small town, people have seen it go wrong before. They've seen developers make promises and deliver something different or deliver nothing. That's the room you're walking into. I know that too. Then why are you telling me this? She thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was complicated, and she was not accustomed to complicated honesty in professional contexts. She had spent a decade learning to be strategically direct, which was a different thing. Because you've been right about everything, she said. The electrical table, the drainage, the crossing barrier, everything you've seen about this town's infrastructure has been accurate. And you wrote 42 pages about it, and no one listened. She held his gaze. I'm listening. I don't know yet what that means practically, but I wanted you to know that before I walk into that meeting. The seam in his composure didn't widen, but it didn't close either. He sat with what she'd said for a moment, in the way of someone deciding if they believed it. Then he picked up his fork and ate. She ate too. The biscuits and gravy were the best thing she'd had in days, which she hadn't expected, and she told Pat so when she came to refill the coffee, and Pat said, "I know, hun," with the complete absence of surprise. They were almost done when Ethan said, without preamble, "The presentation. If you're going to acknowledge the infrastructure problems, you need specifics. General language about a revised plan will land like the county commissioner saying your concerns are noted." "I agree. I can give you the specifics." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'll sit down with you tonight and go through what I have. The electrical analysis, the drainage sketch, the substation projections. You can use whatever helps. You don't have to call it mine. You can say it came from a local infrastructure review, which is accurate enough." He said it matter-of-factly, like a man offering to help carry something heavy, because he could see that it needed carrying. "Why would you do that?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. He looked out the diner window at the morning street of Willow Creek, the hardware store, the taxidermist, Denton's family market down the block, the water stain still drying on the asphalt from 2 days ago. "Because if this project gets built wrong, the people who live here deal with it for 30 years, he said. "And I live here." It wasn't about her. She understood that completely, and it didn't bother her at all. "Tonight, then," she said. "Where?" "My place is fine. Lily goes to bed at 8:30. He picked up the check before she could reach it. She opened her mouth and he shook his head. "It's a $10 breakfast." She left the tip. His house was on a street called Maple Run, which was exactly what it sounded like. A quiet residential street with old maple trees and modest houses set back from the road with varying levels of lawn ambition. His was a white 2-story with a covered porch, visually unremarkable in every way except for the yard, which had a raised vegetable bed along the south fence that was clearly tended with real attention, and a set of wind chimes hanging from the porch eave that were the sound equivalent of the yard, unhurried, purposeful, pleasant without trying to be. She knocked at 7:30. Lily answered the door in pajamas and looked at her with the frank assessment of a child evaluating an unexpected adult. "Dad said you were coming," she said. "Did you pet Biscuit yet?" "I have," Victoria said. 3 times this week." Lily seemed to find this satisfactory. "He scratched me once, but we're friends now." She stepped back. "Dad's in the kitchen." The house was not clean in the way of a house prepared for a visitor. It was clean in the way of a house where someone kept things orderly out of habit, dishes done, surfaces clear. But Lily's school backpack on the chair by the door and a half-finished drawing on the coffee table and a row of small sneakers lined up with the particular imprecision of a child who understood the concept of a shoe line but was still negotiating the execution. Books on the shelf had been read and replaced without attention to size order. A plant on the windowsill had gotten overgrown and been roughly cut back and was now making a patchy comeback. It was a real house. She had been in many houses that were not real, that were composed and photographed and presented as evidence of a particular kind of life. This was not that. Ethan was at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee already poured and his laptop open beside a spread of printed papers and hand-drawn diagrams. He looked up when she came in. "Sit anywhere." She sat across from him. Lily appeared in the doorway long enough to ask if Victoria wanted crackers, and when told no thank you, disappeared back toward the living room with her own crackers and a book. "She's up late," Victoria said. "She knows when she needs to go to sleep," he said. "Usually better than I tell her." He turned the laptop toward her. "Start here. This is the substation load model I built last spring." They worked for 2.5 hours. It was not a comfortable process in any conventional sense. He was precise to the point of bluntness. When she misunderstood one of his diagrams and summarized it incorrectly, he corrected her without softening it, and she found she preferred that to the elaborate diplomatic rephrasing her consultants used when correcting her. He expected her to keep up, which she mostly did, and when she didn't, she asked directly, and he explained without condescension. She learned things she hadn't known to look for. The sequence of the failures wasn't just electrical. It was a cascade. Overloaded grid leading to brownouts, leading to HVAC failures in summer, leading to public health stress on the same infrastructure everyone was already using. He had modeled it out 4 years. The model wasn't pessimistic. It was just complete. He also showed her something she hadn't anticipated. a version of the Route 7 corridor redesign. Not detailed, not engineered to spec, but enough to understand the direction. How the eastern parking strip could become retention, where a secondary substation connection could be routed without major disruption to the Phase 2 timeline. How the loading dock could be repositioned 80 feet north to remove the vibration issue on the residential corner. It was an elegant version of the project, not perfect, not without trade-offs, but better, in every dimension that mattered to the people who lived here, than what she had approved 6 weeks ago. At 10:15, Ethan looked at his watch and stood up to check on Lily, who had, it turned out, fallen asleep on the couch, with her book open on her chest and her crackers half-eaten on the cushion beside her. He stood in the living room doorway for a moment, looking at her with that expression Victoria had seen in the grocery store, the one that stopped her then and stopped her now. Then he came back to the kitchen, picked up his coffee mug, found it empty, and refilled it from the pot. "Tomorrow night," Victoria said, "I want to acknowledge the infrastructure gaps and propose a redesign process that incorporates the corrections. I'm going to tell them the timeline is moving. I'm going to tell them why." She paused. "And I want to tell them that the corrections came in part from local knowledge, without naming you if you want." He was leaning against the kitchen counter with his mug. He thought about it. "Name me," he said. She looked at him. "If you're using the analysis, name where it came from," he said. "Otherwise, it's just a company saying it found its own mistakes, which nobody's going to believe. It might put you in an uncomfortable position with some people in town." "I live here," he said, with the same flatness he'd used at the diner. "I'm already in a position." She nodded. "Okay." She gathered her copies of his diagrams and slid them into her folder. She stood. He walked her to the door the way people did in houses where hospitality was a habit rather than a performance. On the porch, she stopped. "Can I ask you something that isn't about the project?" she said. He waited. "The day I arrived, in the grocery store parking lot." She held his gaze. "I laughed at your truck." He was very still. "I took a picture of it, sent it to a friend, made a joke." She said it straight. No dramatics. "I want you to know I know that." He looked at her for a moment. His expression was not what she expected. Not wounded, not satisfied by the admission, not warm with forgiveness. "I know you did," he said. It took her a beat. "How?" "Small town." A brief dry thing crossed his face that was almost a smile. "Gerald told me Tuesday." She stood on his porch and felt something she was going to have to sit with for a while. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded once, accepted it without elaborating. That was all. She walked down the porch steps into the cool night. Behind her, the wind chimes moved in the dark, making their unhurried sound. The town council meeting was at 7 the following evening. Victoria arrived at 6:45, set up the projector, and sat at the presenters' table watching the room fill. She had rewritten the presentation 3 times since this morning. The version on her laptop now bore almost no resemblance to the polished 40-slide deck her communications team had prepared in New York. This one had 31 slides. 7 of them were new, built in the past 48 hours. 3 of them were based on diagrams drawn by hand in Ethan Cole's kitchen. She had not told her New York team what she was doing. Dana had called twice. She had let it go to voicemail. The room filled. 60 people, then 70. Marjorie from the council meeting was in the 3rd row again. The man from the corner shop on Route 7 and Mills. Gerald, who had apparently closed the motel desk early to attend. Ruth from the library. Ethan came in at 6:58 and sat near the back. Lily was not with him. She was at school in the morning, which meant she was at a neighbor's tonight, which meant Ethan Cole had found a babysitter and come to a town council meeting alone to watch a presentation based partly on his own work. Victoria looked at him across the room. He looked back. Gave her nothing. No nod, no encouragement, no warning, just steady attention. The mayor called the meeting to order. She stood up. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm the CEO of Sterling Development, and we're the company behind the Route 7 redevelopment proposal you've been hearing about." She paused, looking at the room, not performing calm, actually finding it, in that specific way that came when you had decided to tell the truth and stopped dreading it. "I want to start tonight by telling you that the plan I was going to present to you 3 weeks ago was wrong. Not wrong in intent, I believe in this project, and I believe it can genuinely benefit this community, but wrong in some of its foundations. And I want to explain exactly how that happened and exactly what we're doing about it. The room was very quiet. 6 weeks ago, she said, my company hired an experienced consulting firm to assess the infrastructure requirements for this corridor. They did a thorough job by industry standards. The problem is that industry standards in this case included a residential electrical load table from 2009 that doesn't account for current demand factors. My consultants didn't catch it. I didn't catch it. She clicked to the first new slide, the load projection comparison, Dale's numbers alongside the corrected figures Ethan had built. An independent local infrastructure review caught it 14 months ago and submitted it to the county planning board, where it was filed without action. Marjorie in the third row made a sound that was not quite a word. The man who did that review is named Ethan Cole, Victoria said. Some of you know him. He identified not only the electrical load issue, but several additional infrastructure concerns that my team missed. I've spent the past week reviewing his analysis. He's right about all of it. She looked at the room. I'm not standing here to manage your reaction to that. I'm telling you because you deserve to know where the better information came from, and it didn't come from my expensive consultants. It came from someone who lives in this town and has been paying attention to it for years. She found Ethan in the back of the room. He was looking at the projection screen with an expression she could not read from this distance. Tonight, she said, I'm going to walk you through what the problems are, what the corrected approach looks like, and what the new timeline means. The project is not dead, but it's not what I showed you on paper 3 weeks ago. What I want to propose tonight is something better. I want you to hold me to it. She clicked to the next slide. Outside, the Tennessee evening pressed against the rec center's high windows. Spring dark, quiet, the smell of everything that had grown up after the rain. Inside, 60-something people who had learned to be skeptical of developers making promises sat and listened to one of them tell a harder, truer version of the story. And in the back row, a man who had written 42 pages that no one read sat with his arms crossed and his face carefully neutral, watching the room absorb something he had known for a long time finally reach the ears that could act on it. The applause at the end of the presentation was not the kind Victoria was accustomed to. She had presented to boards, to investors, to city councils in 3 states and 2 countries. That applause was a specific sound, polished, brief, the social lubricant of rooms where everyone already knew the outcome. This was different. It started slowly, from the back, and spread with the irregular rhythm of people deciding something rather than performing it. Not a standing ovation. Not unanimous. Marjorie in the third row clapped once, stopped, then clapped again like she was testing the temperature of the water. The man from the corner shop on Route 7 and Mills sat with his arms crossed for a moment before he let them uncross. It was the applause of people who had been surprised and hadn't decided yet what to do with that. Victoria stood at the front of the room and let it settle. The questions came after. 40 minutes of them, pointed and specific in the way of people who had been thinking about this project for months, and finally had someone in the room who seemed to be answering rather than managing. She fielded them steadily. The drainage timeline to the substation upgrade funding, the construction routing. When she didn't know an answer, she said so, which surprised people, and wrote the question in her notebook, which surprised them more. One man near the middle, she didn't know his name, hadn't seen him before, stood up and asked, with the particular directness of someone who had been burned before, "How do we know you don't come back in 6 months with the original plan and tell us the redesign wasn't feasible?" The room got quiet in a specific way. Victoria thought about the version of herself who had laughed in a parking lot a week ago, who had told a driver to go through a flooded crossing because a conference call waited in Nashville, who had read a 40-page infrastructure report and written 2 minor comments in the margin. "You don't," she said. "Not based on tonight. You're going to have to watch." She paused. "What I can tell you is that the revised plan will be presented to a community review panel before it goes to the county. That panel will include residents who can reject it. I'll put that in writing before I leave Willow Creek." The man sat down without fully committing to satisfaction, which was reasonable and honest of him. Ethan was gone by the time the formal session ended. She caught a glimpse of him heading for the exit during the last round of questions. Not leaving early, she thought, just slipping out in the way of someone who had gotten what they came for and didn't need the aftermath. She didn't try to catch him. There would be time. What she didn't expect was Marjorie. The woman found her while she was packing up the laptop, appearing at the edge of the presenter's table with the directness of someone who had decided to have a conversation and was not going to be deflected by small talk. She was 50-something, broad-shouldered, with the slightly weathered look of a person who spent time outdoors, and she looked at Victoria with an expression that was not warm but was not hostile either, something between assessment and acknowledgement. "Marjorie Tran," she said. "I run the Small Business Coalition here. 23 businesses on and around the Route 7 corridor." "I know who you are," Victoria said. "You asked about community engagement at the Public Works meeting." Marjorie blinked, briefly surprised. "You were there?" "In the back." Marjorie looked at her for a moment. "You weren't supposed to be there." "No." A beat. Then something shifted in Marjorie's face. Not warmth, but recalibration. She picked up one of the printed summaries from the table, the one with the revised timeline and the community review panel language. She scanned it. "This review panel," she said. "Who picks the residents?" "I was thinking the coalition nominates candidates and the county certifies them." Marjorie looked up. "You were thinking that, or you decided that tonight because I'm standing here?" "I decided it 3 days ago," Victoria said. "Tonight I said it out loud." Another beat. "All right," Marjorie said. She folded the summary and put it in her jacket pocket. "I'm going to hold you to this with both hands." "I expect you to." Marjorie left without further ceremony. Gerald was by the door talking to someone from the county works department. He caught Victoria's eye as she passed and gave her a nod. A small, specific nod, the kind that said, "That went better than it might have." She gave him one back. Outside, the parking lot was emptying in the cool spring dark. She sat on the hood of the rented Jeep for a few minutes, which was not something she did generally, sitting on car hoods in parking lots without a task in front of her. But the night was clear after a week of storms, and the stars above Willow Creek were the particular dense and serious kind that didn't exist in New York, and she was tired in a way that was different from her usual tired. Not depletion. Something closer to the feeling after a hard physical effort, the kind of tired that meant something had actually been done. She drove back to the Birchwood and called Dana. Dana answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. "How did it go?" Dana asked carefully. "Better than expected," Victoria said. "I need you to draft a formal letter of commitment on the community review panel. Residents have approval rights on the revised plan before county submission. Get legal to review the language." A pause. Victoria, that's a significant concession." "Yes. If they reject the revised plan, we lose the timeline entirely. Possibly the—" "Dana." She pulled into the Birchwood lot and sat in the parked Jeep. "Draft the letter." "Okay." Dana's voice shifted, not resigned, more like recalibrating. "Anything else? Reach out to Harlan Cross Engineering in Memphis. Their former employee files, specifically any documentation related to a mid-2010 Mississippi Highway corridor project involving an electrical grounding fault claim. I want whatever is on the public record." A longer pause. "That's a specific request." "It is." "Are we in some kind of litigation situation I should know about?" "No, it's background." She turned off the engine. "I'll explain later." She went inside. Biscuit was at the front desk on top of it this time, which Gerald seemed to have made his peace with. The cat looked at her with the sovereign indifference of an animal that had decided she was acceptable but wasn't going to make a thing of it. "Good meeting?" Gerald asked. "It was a real meeting," she said, "which is different." He smiled. Ethan used to say that. He'd go to those county sessions and come back and say, "It wasn't a real meeting, Gerald. It was a performance of a meeting." He stroked Biscuit absently. Tonight sounded like a real one. "It was," she said. She went to her room and sat at the desk and opened the draft of the Community Review Panel commitment letter that legal had started sending through an hour ago. She read it twice, made 6 annotations, and sent it back. Then she opened the project file and stared at it for a long time. The honest problem, the one she hadn't said out loud to anyone, was this. She didn't know how to build the better version of the project without Ethan Cole. Not in the flattering sense, not only he can save this, but in the practical, architectural sense. His analysis was not a collection of problems she could hand off to Dale's team to fix. It was a coherent vision of what this corridor could be if it was built by someone who understood both the engineering and the community. Handing it to Dale's team and saying, "Fix these items," would produce fixes. What she had seen in his kitchen was something else. She could hire him. She had been thinking about hiring him since the hardware store, but she had also heard what he said at Millie's, "I'm not interested in a consulting contract." And she had learned enough in the past week to know that the distinction between what he said and what he meant was usually very small. She didn't sleep well that night. Not anxious exactly, more like restless with the unresolved, the feeling of a problem she could see clearly but couldn't yet reach. In the morning, she drove to his house. She hadn't called ahead. She told herself it was because she hadn't had his number until Gerald wrote it on a scrap of paper for her. For emergencies, Gerald had said, and she'd said it's not an emergency, and Gerald had said, "I know, but you'll want it anyway." And also because calling ahead would have given him the option of a measured response, and she needed an actual conversation. It was 8:15 on a Saturday. She pulled up in front of the White House on Maple Run and sat in the Jeep for a minute. The vegetable bed along the south fence had been worked recently, fresh soil visible where something had been planted. The wind chimes were moving in the barely there morning breeze. She got out and knocked. Lily answered again, dressed this time. Jeans and a yellow shirt with a small star on the pocket, hair in a ponytail that someone had attempted to center and not quite managed. She looked at Victoria with recognition and mild interest. "It's Saturday," she said informatively. "I know. I'm sorry to come early. Dad's in the backyard." Lily considered. "You can come through." She stepped back. Victoria followed her through the house, through the living room where the half-finished drawing was now finished and taped to the wall, through a kitchen that smelled like coffee and toast, and out a back door onto a wooden deck that needed repainting and had a table with two mismatched chairs and one chair that was clearly Lily's because it had a cushion tied to it with a ribbon. Ethan was kneeling beside a raised bed at the far end of the yard, doing something with a trowel and what appeared to be tomato seedlings. He heard the door and looked up. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had half expected this and had decided not to mention it. "Coffee's inside," he said. "Help yourself." She poured herself a mug from the pot on the counter. The kitchen was small, the mug was plain, the coffee was stronger than Millie's, and came back out to the deck. Lily had disappeared somewhere inside. Through an upstairs window, she could hear the sound of what was probably a tablet, a cartoon of some kind, the muffled voices of animated characters doing something with great enthusiasm. Ethan finished with the seedlings, stood, and knocked the dirt from his knees. He picked up the coffee he'd left on the ground beside him and came to the deck, sitting in one of the mismatched chairs. "The meeting went well," she said. "I heard." He looked at her with mild curiosity. "From 3 different people before I got home last night." "Small town." "Always." He drank his coffee. "Marjorie texted me at 10:30. That's the first time she's ever texted me anything that wasn't about the drainage easement on her property line." "What did she say?" She said, and I'm quoting, "Your developer actually showed up." He looked out at the yard. For Marjorie, that's about as close to a standing ovation as you get. Victoria wrapped both hands around her mug. The morning was cool and clean, the kind of morning that existed in the gap between spring being an idea and spring being a fact. "I need to ask you something," she said. "You came here on a Saturday morning at 8:50, he said. "I figured. I need someone who understands what this project should be, not to fix the parts that are broken, to understand the whole thing from the foundation up, the way you understand it." She said it plainly, without the language of corporate recruitment, because that language would land wrong here, and she knew it. "What you did in that kitchen the other night, that's not a list of corrections. That's a different project, a better one, and I don't have the expertise to build it without someone who thinks the way you do." He was quiet, looking at the tomato seedlings. "I know you said you weren't interested in a contract," she said. "I'm not offering a contract right now. I'm telling you what I need and asking if you have any interest in being part of it." "What does that look like practically?" he said. "I don't know yet. That would be part of the conversation." She paused. "But I'm not talking about a peripheral advisory role. I'm talking about lead infrastructure consultant on the full redesign." The yard was quiet. Somewhere a bird was working on something in the maple tree at the fence line. "I have a business here," he said. Not defensive, factual. Electrical work, maintenance contracts with 4 local businesses, the permit work I do for the county. That's how Lily has lunch and new shoes when she needs them. I know. A consulting contract on a project like this, if it goes sideways, if the company pulls back, if the politics change, I'm left with a gap and a name attached to a failed development. That's a real risk, she said. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. He looked at her then. A longer look. What did you find out about Harlan Cross? The question landed quietly, but she felt the weight of it. She had gotten the call from Dana at 7 that morning. The public record on the Mississippi Corridor project was thinner than she'd expected. Settlements had non-disclosure architecture built around them. The state contractor's report was heavily redacted, and Harlan Cross's public statements from the period were careful and minimal. But there was enough. An OSHA incident report, a state infrastructure board finding, available through the public record request Dana had filed at 6 a.m. A brief mention in a Memphis Business Journal from 8 years ago about personnel changes at Harlan Cross following a project review. The incident report named 2 workers. Their injuries were described in the flat, specific language of regulatory documentation, which somehow made them worse to read than emotive language would have. One man had lost partial function in his right hand. The other had nerve damage that the report characterized as likely permanent. I found enough, she said. He looked away again. Back at the yard, the seedlings, the fence. You were right, she said, and you paid for it anyway. The 2 men paid for it, he said. Flat, unambiguous, and she understood this was a line he had drawn precisely and maintained for years. The distinction between what it had cost him and what it had cost the men who were in the building when the fault finally expressed itself. Yes, she said, they did. The silence after that had a particular quality, not awkward, not weighted with unspoken feeling in the dramatic sense, but real. The weight of something true that had been stated and didn't need elaboration. After a while he said, if I did this, and I'm not saying I am, I'm not a corporate entity. I don't have an office or a firm name or liability coverage beyond what a residential contractor carries. We can fix the liability coverage. The company would carry it. I do this my way, or I don't do it. Meaning, I'm not cleaning up findings to fit a timeline or a budget. If the analysis says something is wrong, it goes in the report. That's exactly what I want, she said. What happened with your last employer happened because people did the opposite of that. He looked at her with the measuring quality she had become familiar with. Not suspicious, not warm, just thorough. Reading the crossing before committing to it. I'd need to be able to manage my existing work commitments in parallel, he said. The maintenance contracts, the permit work. Lily's schedule doesn't change. We work around it. I'm not going to be in Nashville or New York. Any meetings that require me in person happen here or by video. Fine. And I want the 42-page report I submitted to the county acknowledged formally as part of the project record. Not just cited, formally acknowledged with a date, showing it preceded your company's involvement. She understood why immediately. To establish that the findings existed before Sterling Development arrived, she said, and that they were filed and ignored for over a year, he said, without bitterness, just as a condition. Done, she said. I'll have legal draft it. He drank the rest of his coffee. Set the mug down on the deck rail. Let me think about it, he said. Of course. She stood. She had expected this. He was not a man who made quick decisions about things that mattered, which was part of why she trusted the decisions he made. She was almost to the back door when he said, the town council meeting last night. She turned. The part where you told them the corrections came from local knowledge, he said. You didn't have to do that. You could have said your team caught it in review. She looked at him. I know. Why didn't you? She thought about it honestly. Because the truth was more useful than the version that made me look competent, she said, and because you deserved it. He held her gaze for a moment. That measuring look again, and this time something at the edge of it that she couldn't quite name. Not approval, something quieter than that. She went back through the house. In the living room, Lily was now on the couch with a book, the tablet apparently abandoned, and she looked up when Victoria passed. Did you ask him? Lily said. Victoria paused. What? Dad said someone might ask him to do something big. He was trying to decide. She said it with the direct matter-of-factness of a child who had overheard a phone call and processed it literally. "Did you ask him?" "Yes," Victoria said. "What did he say?" "He said he'd think about it." Lily nodded, apparently satisfied with this as a process. "He does that," she said. "He thought about getting the dog for 2 months." "Did he get the dog?" "No, but it was a close thing." She turned back to her book. "He would have been a good dog, Dad." Victoria stood in the living room doorway for a beat. Then she said, "Lily, can I ask you something?" The girl looked up. "Do you like living here, in Willow Creek?" Lily thought about it with the seriousness she brought to things. "Yes," she said. "My friends are here, and Grandma's 40 minutes away, and I know where everything is. She paused. "Dad says knowing where everything is underrated." "Your dad's right about a lot of things," Victoria said. Lily looked at her steadily. "I know," she said, without any particular pride, just as a fact. The same way she'd said it in the hardware store about the floods. Victoria went to the Jeep and drove back to the Birchwood. She had 3 days left before she needed to be in New York. The revised project timeline was 6 weeks for the new infrastructure analysis, then 8 weeks for redesign with community review, then a new groundbreaking target of the following spring. Dale Whitford's team had called twice wanting a meeting. She had scheduled it for Monday and told them to be ready to work from Ethan Cole's analysis as the baseline, which had produced a silence on the phone that she allowed to be uncomfortable. She spent the afternoon on the phone with her board. 3 calls, each one a version of the same conversation. The timeline change. The cost of the electrical redesign. The community review panel commitment. Each board member moved through skepticism, resistance, and grudging acceptance in their own order, at their own speed. She answered the same questions multiple times in different framings, which was the actual work of being the person in her position, the part that the covers of business magazines left out. Her CFO, a sharp and largely unsentimental man named Harrison, asked her at the end of their call, "Victoria, is this project still viable?" She thought about the sketch on Ethan's phone, the bioretention strip along the eastern edge, the secondary substation routing, the corridor as it could be rather than as it had been planned. "More viable than it was 2 weeks ago," she said. "That's a non-answer." "Yes," she said, "the project is viable. The original spec wasn't. We're fixing it." Harrison accepted this without enthusiasm and told her to make sure legal had reviewed the community panel language 3 times, not twice. She was on the deck of the Birchwood. Gerald had put out 2 plastic chairs and a small table outside room 1, which faced the parking lot rather than the road but had afternoon sun, when her phone showed Ethan's number at 4:30. She answered. "I'll do it," he said. She exhaled, slow and quiet, the kind of breath she usually didn't permit herself in professional contexts. "Good. 6 months initially. If it's working, we revisit. Fair. The terms we talked about this morning. I'll have the agreement drafted Monday. You can have your own counsel review it." A brief pause. "I don't have a lawyer on retainer. I'll refer you to someone in the county, independent, not our firm." "All right." Another pause. Shorter. "The formal acknowledgement of the infrastructure report, the county filing date, documented in the project record. Already in the draft." Something on his end, the background sound of his house, something small in the distance that might have been Lily, the particular ambient texture of an ordinary late afternoon. It was so different from her own background sounds that the contrast felt like a fact. "One more thing," he said. "What?" "The Carver Creek crossing barrier. You said in the meeting you were looking at options outside the state funding cycle." "I'm looking at direct county funding mechanisms," she said. "If we tie a portion of the development's infrastructure budget to county road improvements as a good faith contribution, we can move independently of the state schedule." "How quickly?" "If the county agrees to manage the installation, materials and labor could start within 2 months. Silence for a moment. "That crossing put 3 people on car roofs last month," he said. "And those are just the ones I know about." "I know," she said. "Okay," he said. "Monday, then." He ended the call. She set the phone on the small table and looked at the parking lot, which was not scenic and was currently occupied by her rented Jeep and two other vehicles and a dumpster that the Birchwood apparently shared with the hardware store next door. The afternoon sun was doing its best with these materials and not quite winning. She called Dana and told her to draft 2 documents for Monday: the consulting agreement for Ethan Cole and a letter of interest to Harker County on the Carver Creek crossing barrier. Then she went back inside and sat at the desk and did something she almost never did in the middle of a work period. She called her mother, who lived in a suburb of Columbus, and asked about her eating habits and her sleep and whether she was seeing anyone, and who had said, when Victoria made her first cover of Forbes at 27, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Are you happy?" And Victoria had said, "Mom, I just made the cover of Forbes." And her mother had said, "I know. Are you happy?" The call lasted 40 minutes. She didn't talk about the project or the board or the timeline change. She talked about the motel cat and the town meeting and a 7-year-old girl who knew when she needed to go to sleep. She talked about biscuits and gravy at a diner that had been open since before she was born. She talked about wind chimes on a porch and a truck she had laughed at and been ashamed of laughing at. Her mother listened. At the end, she said, "You sound different." "Different how?" "Less like you're running somewhere," her mother said. "More like you're actually there." Victoria looked around her room at the Birchwood, the ordinary furniture, the ceiling tile she'd stared at on the first night, the curtain with the gap that let in the parking lot light, the copy of Ethan's 42-page report on the desk beside her laptop, her notebook, full now. "I think I am," she said. She had 2 days left in Willow Creek and a week of catch-up in New York waiting for her like weather. The project had a new shape and a new timeline, and a lead consultant who grew tomatoes and pulled strangers out of floodwater on school nights, and had been right about things that mattered for years before anyone with the power to act had bothered to listen. None of it was clean. The board was unsatisfied. Dale Whitford's team was defensive. The community panel commitment would complicate things in ways she hadn't fully mapped yet. And Ethan Cole was a man who had been hurt by trusting institutions and had not, as far as she could tell, resolved that into a tidy lesson. He had just absorbed it and continued, which was not the same thing and was harder. She knew that. She also knew that the version of this project she had arrived with, the polished plan with the bad load table and the surface parking lot and the loading dock in the wrong place, was gone. And she was not sorry. On her last evening in Willow Creek, she drove out to Carver Creek. The temporary barrier was up. 2 orange and white striped horses across the road approach, a reflective warning sign. The crossing itself was back to being a road, the water level normal, the current slow and ordinary. You could walk across it and get your shoes damp and nothing more. Nothing about it, in the soft May evening, suggested it could become what she had seen from a car roof in the rain. That was the thing about the dangerous places. They looked like nothing most of the time. She stood at the edge of the crossing for a while, watched the water move, thought about angles and current, and a man who had learned to read both before deciding how to proceed. Then she drove back to the Birchwood, packed her bag, and slept better than she had in months. She was back in New York for 11 days before she realized she had changed the way she moved through rooms. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing about it announced itself. But Dana noticed it first. Dana, who had worked for Victoria for 4 years and had the particular perceptiveness of someone whose job required anticipating a person's next move, said on the 3rd day back, "You're listening differently." Victoria had asked what she meant, and Dana had thought about it and said, "You used to listen to find the gap where you could respond. Now you just listen." She'd said it like she wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a diagnosis. Victoria had thought about that for 2 days. The New York office was the same as she'd left it, glass and clean lines, and the particular ambient pressure of a building full of people trying to prove something. Her desk had the same view of the same midtown block. The coffee was the same, which was better than Millie's by any objective measure of equipment and sourcing, and somehow worse. She moved through her first week back with the efficiency her team expected and an interior distance she didn't advertise, like a person who had traveled somewhere and returned to find that the familiar had slightly shifted in their absence, or they had shifted, which was the more accurate thing. The project work kept her anchored. That was real and immediate. The infrastructure redesign was underway. Dale Whitford's team working now from Ethan's baseline analysis, with the particular energy of professionals trying to prove they could do better once they knew what better looked like. The consulting agreement had been signed Monday as planned, with Ethan's county-referred attorney reviewing it and requesting 2 changes, both of which were reasonable and which Victoria approved without negotiation, which surprised the attorney and probably should not have. The formal acknowledgement document, the one recognizing Ethan's 42-page report, the county filing date, the 14 months of inaction, had gone into the project record that same Monday. Victoria had insisted it be a standalone document rather than a footnote in the project file. Her legal team had not understood why this mattered. She had explained it once, clearly, and moved on. She talked to Ethan by phone every 3 or 4 days. The calls were working calls, infrastructure questions, design decisions, the community panel process, the Carver Creek barrier timeline, which was moving faster than anyone had expected because Victoria had framed the development's contribution to the county as a condition of the project's goodwill rather than a separate negotiation. And it turned out that framing made a significant difference to 3 county officials who had been quietly uncomfortable about the barrier situation for years. Construction on the barrier was scheduled to begin in 7 weeks. The working calls were efficient and specific and lasted between 20 and 40 minutes. They were also, she was honest with herself about this, the part of her day she did not check her watch during. It was on the 9th day back that she got the call from a journalist, a woman named Carla Reeves, who wrote for a regional business publication out of Nashville, who had somehow gotten hold of the council meeting notes and the community panel commitment letter and had called to ask about the significant redesign of the Willow Creek development project and reports of an unusual community engagement approach. Victoria almost gave her the standard response. The practiced language of corporate communications, polished and nutritionally empty, the kind of statement that said things without saying them. She had it ready. She could have delivered it in her sleep. Instead, she said, "Let me call you back this afternoon. I want to give you an accurate account." She called Ethan first. "There's a journalist," she said, "Regional Business Press. She's going to write about the project redesign. She'll probably find out your name is attached." A brief pause. "Okay. It might bring attention to the Harlan Cross history. I don't know how deep she'll dig." "She can dig," he said. "The public record says what it says." "Are you sure?" Victoria. The first time he'd used her name without any formality attached. "I've been sure about what happened for 8 years. I was never ashamed of it. I was just too tired to keep fighting it." She sat with that for a moment. "All right. Tell her the part about the load table," he said. "Tell her when I filed the report and when it was filed away. That's the part that matters to people in other small towns watching development projects come through." She told Carla Reeves everything. The flood, the rescue, the hardware store, the 42 pages, the 2009 load table, the community panel. She told it straight, without spin, in the way of someone who had decided that the honest version was both more useful and more interesting than the managed version. Carla Reeves was quiet for most of it, which was the sign of a good journalist, asking only when she needed to, letting the story fill the available space. The piece ran 3 weeks later. It was titled, "Who Actually Knows Your Town? A Tennessee Development Project's Hard Lesson." It was 4,000 words, and it was accurate, and it was shared widely enough that Victoria's communications director called her at 7 in the morning the day it went up and said, with a mixture of professional alarm and grudging admiration, "You gave her everything." "Yes," Victoria said, The board is going to read it and realize the press on this is better than the press on a development project that failed community trust 2 years in," she said. "Call me after 9. She was right about the board. It took them until Friday to arrive at that conclusion, but they got there. She was in Nashville for a county meeting 5 weeks after returning to New York. Her 3rd trip back to Tennessee in as many weeks, which her assistant had stopped remarking on, when she drove out to Willow Creek on a Thursday evening without a scheduled reason. She told herself it was to see the Carver Creek site preparation. The ground crew had broken ground on the barrier foundation that week. She had photos from the county engineer, but photos were different from seeing. That was a legitimate reason. She held it. She parked at the crossing and walked down to the bank. The foundation forms were in clean concrete work, the beginning of something permanent and specific, and, she thought, several years overdue. A county worker she didn't recognize was checking elevations on the far bank. He looked up and nodded at her and went back to work. She stood there for a few minutes. The creek was running normally, narrow, slow in this section. unremarkable. She remembered what it had looked like from a car roof in the rain. She was glad this was getting built. In the same quiet way, she was glad about things that were simply right. She drove to Maple Run. She hadn't called ahead this time either, which she recognized as a pattern she was developing that said something she wasn't quite ready to say directly to herself. It was a Thursday evening at 6:30. She pulled up in front of the White House and sat in the Jeep for a moment, which was also a pattern. The front door opened before she got out. Lily was on the porch in her soccer uniform, cleats in hand, looking at her with an expression of complete unsurprise. "We're going to practice," she announced. "I know. I'm sorry. I should have called." "Dad!" Lily turned back into the house. "Ms. Victoria is here." Ethan appeared in the doorway behind her. He was in jeans and a faded navy t-shirt, car keys in his hand, clearly mid-transition. He looked at her with the measuring expression that had softened. Not disappeared, just become more comfortable, like a door that used to stick and had been planed down to fit. "Soccer practice," he said. "I saw the uniform." She gestured toward the Jeep. "I can go. I didn't call ahead. That's on me." He looked at her for a moment. "You can come if you want." She blinked. "To soccer practice. It's 45 minutes, then we're going to Millie's." He shrugged, a small motion, like he was deciding something and had decided. "You came all the way from Nashville." Lily was already at the truck, pulling the door open. "She can sit in the middle," she called. "Dad likes the window." "I'm the driver, Lily. You know what I mean?" Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked back. There was something between them that had been building for 5 weeks of phone calls and working documents, and the strange intimacy of people who had talked about serious things in honest ways. Not romantic, not yet. Something anterior to that, a foundation being poured, which was a metaphor she was aware was on the nose, given her profession, and which she chose anyway because it was accurate. "Okay," she said. The soccer field was on the east side of town, a municipal park with 2 fields, both lit, both in use, the air smelling of cut grass and the specific energy of 30 children who had been sitting in school all day and were now released into organized chaos. Lily ran off the moment they parked, her cleats going on her feet in a fluid motion that suggested this was a well-practiced sequence, and she was absorbed into a cluster of 7-year-olds without looking back. Victoria and Ethan stood on the sideline with the other parents, which was a thing she had never done. The other parents ranged from intensely focused to mildly distracted to one father in the corner who was clearly on a work call and trying not to look like it. And she recognized that particular man in a way that was uncomfortable and instructive. She didn't check her phone. She watched the kids run patterns that were loosely related to the concept of soccer and occasionally resolved into actual play. Lily among them, fast and focused, which was not surprising, with an unselfconscious aggression when she went for the ball that was entirely her own, and also, now that Victoria was watching, clearly her father's. "She's good," Victoria said. "She's committed," Ethan said, which is different at this age. The good ones come from committed ones who also turn out to have the coordination. "You played?" "Yeah, high school, nothing serious." He watched Lily take a corner kick. "I was a grinder. I was never going to be fast. I could run longer than most people wanted to, which is a different kind of useful." She thought about that. Running longer than most people wanted to. It was a description of soccer, and also, she suspected, of most things he had done. "The revised electrical analysis came through," she said. "Dale's team submitted it yesterday. It's good. Better than I expected from them." "I saw it. Marcus sent me the draft Tuesday." She looked at him. "You're on the project email now?" "Dana added me 2 weeks ago." He glanced at her sideways. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said, and meant it. "It's what should have happened from the beginning." They stood in easy silence for a while. A 6-year-old from the opposing team fell down near them, looked at her knee with critical assessment, determined there was no blood, and got back up. Lily shouted something encouraging at a teammate in a voice that was significantly louder than her size suggested. "The journalist piece," Ethan said. "I got a call from someone in Chattanooga, city planner. She said they have a development project with similar infrastructure questions, and she wanted to know how we approach the community panel structure." Victoria turned to look at him. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd send her the framework and the formal acknowledgement document structure." He paused. Is that okay? Yes, she said. Please do. She also asked if you'd be willing to talk to their counsel. He said it without particular tone, just putting it out. I told her I'd ask. Tell her yes. He nodded. On the field, Lily scored a goal. Not a clean strike, more of a scramble near the goal line that ended with the ball crossing, and she turned around with her arms up in the manner of someone who understood that results and style were separate categories. Her teammates converged. She was grinning the full-face grin that made her look completely, specifically, 7 years old. Ethan made a sound that wasn't quite a cheer, quieter than that, more internal. The sound a person made when they were watching something that reached somewhere past their ribs. Victoria caught him doing it. He was aware that she caught him. He didn't look away from the field. She knows you're proud of her, Victoria said quietly. I know she does, he said. That doesn't mean I stop. At Millie's, Lily ate pancakes at 6:45 in the evening because it was Thursday, and apparently Thursday was pancake night, which was a household rule established through a negotiation process that Ethan described, when asked, as overwhelming and immediate. She sat across from both of them and ate and talked in the unfiltered way of children who hadn't yet learned to curate what they shared. About a girl at school named Priya, who was her best friend. About a book she was reading that had a horse in it. About whether sharks could smell fear, or if that was just dogs. Which led to a conversation about sharks that lasted until the check came. Victoria paid the check. Ethan reached for it, and she was faster. You paid last time, she said. It was a $10 breakfast. And this is a $20 pancake dinner. I'm still ahead. He made the face of a person deciding if an argument was worth having and determining it was not. Lily looked between them with the attentiveness of a child cataloging something she might need later. Walking back to the truck in the parking lot, Lily took Victoria's hand. It happened without announcement. She simply reached up and took it. The way children did when they decided someone had cleared whatever bar they were quietly maintaining, and walked between the two adults swinging their joined hands in the deliberate, self-satisfied way that was also entirely 7 years old. Ethan saw it. His expression was unreadable, and then it wasn't. Just barely, just at the edge, the way ice broke at the margins before it broke in the middle. He unlocked the truck. Lily climbed in. Victoria stood at the passenger door for a moment. She does that when she likes someone, Ethan said. He was on the driver's side, not looking at her, doing something with the key that didn't require this much attention. She's careful with it. She doesn't do it with everyone. I know, Victoria said. I'm honored. He looked at her over the roof of the truck. The parking lot lights made everything slightly too bright and slightly too flat, the way outdoor lights did, and neither of them moved for a second. I want to say something, he said. She waited. What happened at Harlan Cross? I spent 3 years after it thinking that if I'd been smarter or faster or louder or known the right people, it would have gone differently. He said it steadily, looking at her across the roof of the truck he had driven into floodwater to pull her off a car. I've stopped thinking that. I was right, and I got fired, and 2 men got hurt, and the company paid a settlement, and none of those things fixed the other ones. He paused. I'm telling you this because I want you to know I'm not carrying it the way I used to. I'm not going to let it make me smaller than I am anymore. She looked at him, the directness of it, the specific, deliberate decision to say this, in this parking lot, at this moment, was not something she had a practiced response to, because she had not spent her life in rooms where people said true things this plainly. Good, she said. It came out quiet. You shouldn't. He nodded. Got in the truck. She got in the passenger side. Lily was already asleep against the window. How she had managed this in 30 seconds was unclear and impressive. He drove her back to where she'd left the Jeep at the Birchwood. The town was quiet around them, the particular quiet of a weeknight in a small place where most people were already home. She thought about what her life had looked like 11 weeks ago and tried to find the distance between then and now, and found it was not measurable in the way distance usually was. He pulled into the Birchwood lot, left the engine running, which was the language of a drop-off. She sat for a moment. The groundbreaking is in 4 months, she said. The new spec, the community review approval, everything. I know the timeline, Shab, he said. I'm going to be here a lot between now and then. He looked at her. I know that too. I'm not sure exactly what that means, she said. Honest, because honesty had been the operating principle since a flooded crossing in the rain, and she saw no reason to stop. For the project, I know what it means. For the rest of it, I don't know yet. He was quiet for a moment. Neither do I, he said. Is that okay? He thought about it genuinely, not as a courtesy. Yeah, he said. I think so. She got out, looked back through the window at Lily still asleep against the glass, mouth slightly open, the picture of someone who had eaten pancakes and scored a goal and was now done with Thursday, and entirely at peace with it. She's going to be something, Victoria said. She already is, Ethan said. Victoria went inside. Gerald was at the desk. Biscuit was on top of the desk, an ongoing jurisdictional claim that Gerald had apparently surrendered to. The cat looked at her. Room 11? Gerald said. Please. He got the key. You're here a lot lately, he said, without any particular implication, just noting a fact. I know. She took the key. The project. Sure, Gerald said, in the tone of a man who had been running a small motel for 20 years and had developed opinions about which explanations were complete. She went to room 11 and sat at the small desk and opened her laptop. The project file, the community review panel. Marjorie had submitted 3 nominees that morning, all of whom Victoria had already informally researched and found to be exactly the kind of people she wanted in the room. Skeptical, locally knowledgeable, entirely unmoved by corporate presentation. Good. She wanted to be accountable to people who would not be easily satisfied. The formal groundbreaking was 22 weeks away. She worked for 2 hours, then turned off the light. She lay in the dark of room 11 in the Birchwood Motel and listened to the quiet of Willow Creek at night, which was different from New York's version of quiet. Not an absence of sound, but a different composition of it. Wind. Somewhere an animal. The occasional car on Morrison Street, unhurried. She thought about the things that had changed and the things that hadn't. She was still herself. She was still the woman who checked her email at 6 in the morning and ran a $2 billion company and held her board accountable and did not accept acceptable as a standard when correct was achievable. She was still precise and demanding and had opinions about things and was not, at her core, patient with mediocrity in herself or in people she worked with. She did not expect any of that to change and did not think it should, but she had learned something in a flooded crossing in a Tennessee rainstorm that she was still working out the full dimensions of. She had learned that her metrics had been incomplete, that the things she had been counting, revenue, square footage, coverage, titles, rate per hour, were real but not sufficient, that the untracked things had weight, the 42 pages nobody read, the generator in the truck bed, the hand that knew how to read a current before committing to a crossing, the people whose names weren't on anything. She had built a life on the assumption that visibility and value were roughly proportional, that the person in the room who was doing the most important work was usually the person she could identify as doing the most important work. She had been wrong in the specific way that competent people were wrong, not catastrophically, not through laziness, but through a blind spot so native to her position that she couldn't have seen it from inside her position. It had taken a rust-covered truck and a flooded road and a child eating peanut butter crackers on a hardware store shelf to put her in the position to see it. She wasn't grateful for the flood. She wasn't going to mythologize it. It was a dangerous situation she should never have been in, caused by a decision she had made over a driver's objection, and the outcome had been lucky in addition to being assisted. But she was grateful for what came after. The groundbreaking happened on a Tuesday in late September, which was not a glamorous day for an event and was the day the project was actually ready, so Tuesday it was. The corridor looked different in September than it had in May. The summer had been long, and the light was beginning to shift toward the particular gold of Tennessee autumn, and the industrial lots that would become the redeveloped corridor were staked and surveyed with the bright orange markers of something about to begin. A small crowd had gathered, so not a staged audience, just people who wanted to see, including most of the town council. Marjorie Tran and 4 members of her small business coalition, Gerald from the Birchwood, Ruth from the library, the man from the corner shop on Route 7, and Mills, who had asked the hard question at the town council meeting. The county commissioner was there, which was appropriate. He gave a brief speech that was competent and forgettable. Victoria gave a shorter one that wasn't. She talked about the electrical grid, about the community panel review process. Marjorie had rejected 2 elements of the Phase 2 commercial design and required revisions, both of which had made the plan better, one of which had required Dale Whitford's team to entirely rethink the loading access configuration. She talked about the Carver Creek barrier, which had been completed 3 weeks earlier. She talked about what it meant to build something in a community rather than for a community, which was a distinction she had come to understand in a parking lot in May and had been trying to practice since. She did not say any of this in the polished language of corporate communications. She said it in the way of someone describing something they had actually learned, which is different and sounds different and lands differently. When she finished, Marjorie clapped first. Not a standing ovation, just first, which for Marjorie meant something specific. The ceremonial shovel in the ground happened, which was the kind of formality Victoria usually found awkward, and found today only slightly awkward, which was progress. Ethan stood to one side in a collared shirt that was the most formal she had seen him. Not a suit, just a shirt with buttons all the way up, his concession to an occasion. Lily was beside him in her good dress. The one with the small anchor on the collar that she had informed Victoria last week was her most serious outfit and therefore appropriate for groundbreakings. After the formalities, the crowd shifted into the comfortable disorder of people who knew each other standing around talking. Someone had brought a folding table with coffee and pie, peach and apple from Millie's, which was exactly right. Ruth found Victoria at the coffee table. "I made a copy of the groundbreaking program," she said, "for the archive." "That's appropriate," Victoria said. "I also made a copy of the formal acknowledgement document." Ruth looked at her directly. "The one recognizing Ethan's report. I put it in the archive under his name." She paused. "It should have been there 14 months ago." "Yes," Victoria said. "It should have." Ruth nodded. Got her coffee and went to find someone to talk to. Lily found her next. She appeared at Victoria's elbow with a piece of peach pie on a paper plate and a plastic fork and held it up. "You should eat something," she said. "You've been standing and talking for a long time." Victoria took the plate. "Thank you, Lily." "You're welcome." Lily looked out at the staked lots with the orange markers, the surveying equipment, the beginning of a thing. "Is it going to look good when it's done?" Victoria considered the question honestly. "I think so. Different from what we first planned. Better, I think." "Dad says better than planned is the best kind of thing." "Your dad is right about most things." "I know," Lily said, for the third time Victoria could count, in the same tone she had always said it. Factual, unadorned, total. She went to find her father. Victoria stood with her pie and her coffee and watched the people of Willow Creek move through the late September morning, talking and eating and looking at the orange-staked ground that would become, over the next 18 months, something new in the place where something old had stopped serving them well. Ethan appeared beside her. He had a coffee. He looked at the same thing she was looking at. "Good day," he said. "Yes." "The substation upgrade contract signed yesterday," he said. "Fletcher Road substation starts in November." "I know. Dana texted me." "She texts faster than most people think." "I know that too." They stood there in the easy way of people who had gotten used to standing next to each other. Not performing comfort, actually having it. The kind that came from working through hard things together, from the specific intimacy of honest disagreement and honest agreement and the long middle ground of just doing the work. "I want to ask you something," he said. She waited. "There's a state infrastructure conference in Nashville in November. The city planner from Chattanooga, she's presenting on community panel models. She asked if I'd speak about the technical approach, the load analysis methodology." He looked at his coffee. "I've never done that. Presented formally. I've done reports that got filed." "You should do it," she said immediately. "I'd need—" he started. "I'll be there," she said. "If you want. Front row or back row. Whichever is better for your nerves." He looked at her. Something in it, the specific combination of the offer and the front row or back row precision, which was a very her kind of thing to say, made him almost smile. Not quite, but almost, and she had learned that almost was a different currency for him than for most people, and she had started to pay attention to the denominations. "Front row," he said, "is terrible for a speaker's nerves." "Back row, then." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I'll do it. She nodded, drank her coffee. The morning went on around them. Lily was in the middle of a group of adults she'd decided to entertain, explaining something with both hands. The anchor dress energy at full deployment. The man from the corner shop was talking to a county engineer, pointing at the loading access markers with the focused attention of someone whose foundation had been weighing on him for a long time. Gerald was eating pie with the contentment of a man who had shown up and was glad to have done so. Ruth was in the corner talking to Marjorie. Whatever they were saying had Marjorie nodding in the way she nodded when she was being convinced of something she had half already believed. Victoria thought about the morning she had arrived in Willow Creek. The polished plan in her laptop bag, the conference call on the drive-in, the protein bar on the center console, the certainty of a woman who had measured everything and believed the measurements were complete. She thought about the parking lot and the photograph she had sent to Margot, God help us, and what that had cost her, not in any dramatic way, but in the way of things you did without thinking that revealed something true about your thinking. She thought about what it meant that a truck she had laughed at had become the most important vehicle she had ever been inside. The lesson, if she was being honest with herself about what she had actually learned rather than what sounded right to say, was not that wealth didn't matter, or that simple was better than complex, or that small towns were more real than cities. Those were the easy versions. The easy versions were clean and portable and fit on a card. The actual thing was harder to carry. It was this. She had been extraordinarily good at measuring what was in front of her, and extraordinarily confident that what was in front of her was what there was. She had walked into rooms and assessed them quickly and trusted those assessments, and she had usually been right, and being usually right had insulated her from understanding how much the exceptions cost. Ethan Cole had been an exception. His 42-page report had been an exception. The man from the corner shop and his foundation, and the woman on Hale Road with her oxygen concentrator, all of them had been exceptions to a model of the world that had no room for what it didn't see. The model had been hers. She had built it. And she had arrived in Willow Creek, Tennessee, at the wheel of a $100,000 SUV, absolutely certain it was accurate. She was not the villain of this story, and she was not, entirely, the hero of it either. She was a person who had been wrong in a particular way and had had the luck, and it was luck, partly, she was clear-eyed about that, to be wrong in a place and a moment where someone showed her the correction without making her pay for it more than she had to. That was the actual thing. The sun moved. People finished their coffee and their pie and started heading back to the businesses and schools and workdays that didn't stop because a groundbreaking was happening on a Tuesday in September. The county workers started pulling their equipment toward the first staked positions. Something was beginning. Lily came back and took Victoria's hand again. The same gesture, the same matter-of-fact claiming of something she'd decided was hers to claim. She looked up at Victoria with the clear, unhurried gaze that was all her own. "Are you coming for dinner Sunday?" she asked. Victoria looked across at Ethan, who was watching this exchange with the expression he used when he was waiting to see what happened rather than shaping it. "If I'm invited," she said. "I'm inviting you," Lily said. "Dad makes good chili. It's not too spicy." She paused. "Well, it's a little spicy." "I can handle a little spicy." Lily considered this. "Okay," she said, satisfied. Case closed. She let go of Victoria's hand and went to find someone else to organize, because that was what she did, and she was 7, and the world was still mostly manageable from that position, which was something to hold on to as long as it lasted. Ethan came to stand beside Victoria again. They watched Lily cross the lot with her anchor dress and her good occasion energy and her complete confidence in her own judgment about people, which was, Victoria thought, one of the better inherited qualities a child could carry. "Sunday," Ethan said. Not a question. "Sunday," she said. He nodded. They stood together on the edge of a staked-out lot in late September light and watched the beginning of something that had taken longer than it should have and was better for it, which was true of most things worth building, and which neither of them said out loud because they were both the kind of people who understood that the truest things rarely needed to be said. The wind chimes were back home on the porch on Maple Run, but she could almost hear them. She thought she probably would for a long time after this.